Hey, Tony, great to have you on the show. You are a super entrepreneur and you have this, as you see, I see behind you, and those listeners, viewers who check this out on YouTube, the organization results loop. It sounds like you're doing some great stuff. Please let the audience know something about your background and what you're doing today, and let's dive in.
Sure, happy to do so. So thanks again for having me on. I really appreciate it. And yeah, just to give you a sense of where I come from, I grew up in small business. My parents had a small Italian bakery. And at the age of 12, unfortunately, that bakery failed. And so we lost everything. We lost the house, we lost the car, even lost my dog. So it was a challenging time. But looking back, that kind of set me up for where my purpose was and where I was going to go in the future. And so after that point in time, later on, years later, I went to college to learn entrepreneurship because I really wanted to kind of redeem the past, in a sense, looking back at it. And so I went to school, graduated, and started an online bakery where we could take a cake, put a photo on it, and ship it anywhere in the country and have it arrive perfectly. And what was really cool was we had some products where we had basically promotional products and we had gifts. And so we ended up doing cakes for like Jennifer Lopez and Jay-Z and doing corporate gifts for like IBM and Microsoft and big companies like that. And so I thought at the time, man, I got this entrepreneurship down. I'm in my 20s. I think this is easy. And then I learned that I didn't know what I didn't know, just like my parents didn't know what they didn't know. And so at the age of 28, that business also failed. And here I am, newly married with a baby on the way and trying to figure this out. And I said,
hey, Tony.
Yeah.
Tony, before you go on,
yeah,
I'm sorry, I know it's trivia, but
yeah,
how do you ship a cake and not have it arrive like a mess?
Oh yeah, it was a really cool system. So basically what we did was my father and I came up with it. It was a pin structure. So we had a pin that could go on the bottom of the cake, and we used dry ice, and the cake became solid as a rock. You could literally throw the cake and nothing would happen to it. And so that proprietary system enables us to win Best New Product of the New York Incentive Show and have crazy clients like the clients I just mentioned.
It sounds awesome.
Yeah, it was really cool. So I kind of missed that business. But what I didn't know, if you want to get into that, was I didn't really have an appreciation for profitability. And so because it was such an intense system with shipping and dry ice and all these things, the costs got too high. And as FedEx and UPS raised their shipping costs, it became prohibitive. And just the cost per acquisition relative to the profit wasn't working. And that business failed. So yeah, that's why I said to myself, who does know? Who actually knows how to run a company successfully? And that's why I went for 10 years to work with some of the best companies in the world, like Google, Ford, ADP, etc.
Oh, awesome. Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you.
So
yes. So then I left.
Going?
Yeah. Then I left. I decided, this, my heart is always still with entrepreneurship. And that's why I left those companies to say, okay, how do I help other businesses learn what they don't know by providing the strategy, tools, and tactics? So I started a marketing agency. And as I ran that marketing agency, I noticed that most businesses weren't marketing ready, meaning, they could have some success, but they didn't really know who their customer was. They didn't know how to grow, and they had no idea how to do strategy or planning. So I created a system to help with that area 2 years ago. And now I'm focused on training, consulting, and really spreading the message about how to do strategic planning.
Awesome. So are you finding that your business is picking up during this time of COVID and economic challenges where there's more people? Even, I mean, there's enough dysfunctional companies and leaders normally, yeah, but then you're throwing all the curveballs that we've been thrown.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah, there's a lot more interest in resiliency. And so I'm doing a lot in that area with speaking and seminars and podcasts like we have here. So there's a lot of interest in this area and really how to pivot. So one of the things I teach a business is how do you pivot when you're in uncertainty? And that was actually a lesson I applied to myself because I still have my marketing agency. And that marketing agency had a lot of business in travel, events, weddings, things like that just have declined. And so I took my own system and took it through the process and came up with a whole new segment that we're serving that's doing really, really well.
Oh, that's great. That's great. So talk to us about this organization results loop. It looks
Yeah.
like you've got, what, 6 steps in there?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things I learned, and this goes back to my corporate world, we used to do a lot of planning. Like nothing was left per chance. We'd sit in a room for months on a time, kind of went through every detail. We had a spreadsheet that was 20 or 30 tabs long that described exactly how we were going to grow, what we were going to do with contingencies if we didn't hit the goals, etc. And I kind of looked at that, and I looked at the clients I had, more recently, and I said, "There's no way they're going to be able to ever do this." So small businesses don't plan. And so why is that? Well, it's too hard. Maybe they don't know how to do it. Maybe they don't have the time. There's so many reasons they don't plan. So I said to myself, how do I create a system where anyone can plan and do it in just 15, 20 minutes and really use that system so they can project their growth and really adjust as they go along. And that was kind of the impetus between this, what I call the results loop, is really looking at what are the most critical things you have to focus on. Just talk about those, and that can kind of set the precedence for how you're going to grow with your sales and your marketing.
Well, that sounds like that would be much more appealing to entrepreneurs. Plus, what I've read is, and I forget who are the generals who said it, but they talk about in war, you got to have your plan, you got to have your contingencies, but nothing ever goes to plan.
No, but you have to have them. So. If you have to, yeah, I never have a plan for the sake of having, hitting it. It's always because it makes me think. That's where the opportunities come, because if you just spend a little bit of time focusing on your business, and instead, like they always say, instead of being in the business, that will inevitably give you new opportunities on how you're going to grow. And at least if you have a benchmark, you can execute against it, and and you can adjust and know why you're not hitting it. Because just by having that number there, imagine sports. Imagine if you watch basketball or football or any sport and you're not keeping score. I mean, how are you going to possibly know what's going on?
Yeah. And do you find that when people implement your plan, that they're able to do it equally well on their own, or do they typically work with you or a coach that's in your network? I don't even know whether you have a network, or their own coach, and they try to implement it together. What's typically the best approach?
Yeah, it's best if you do get coaching, because a big part, and I learned this also because a long time ago, I rolled out a program with Google, and Google was trying to get digital advertising into thousands of dealerships. So I worked with Google and Ford Motor Company to roll that out. And Google at one point thought, let's just do this on our own. But the problem always comes down to execution. Like, it's great to have theories on how you're going to do it, but you always have to have what we used to call feet on the street, someone to actually execute. And that's where it's helpful to have a coach or a mentor to work with you through it. That being said, I try to keep it so simple anyone can do it. So I have a planning system where people can learn on their own. I have templates. And one of the best things I have to help businesses that don't have the resources to get help is I have models. So if one of the best things you can do is model someone that's already having success, whether they're a competitor, someone else in another industry. So one of the best ways I've always learned is by looking at who's doing the best in whatever I want to do and modeling what they're doing. So there's a whole bunch of ways, but the absolute best way is to have a coach.
Yeah, it makes sense. And plus, a coach often doesn't have the emotion that the entrepreneur has. So won't get wrapped up in some bias, that type of thing, and has a separate set of experience that can be very valuable. So will you please walk us through your system? I'm very intrigued by it.
Absolutely. So there's really 6 key factors. The first one's your buyers, which is who's going to be buying your product or service. That's really the market you're serving. So it makes a lot of sense to kind of detail into who that is, because that's really sets the precedence for everything else in the loop. That's number 1. Number 2, I'll give some examples after I go through this, but number 2 is your offerings, which are the products and services you're going to provide your market. And those really are tied very closely together, because that impacts your pricing, it impacts how you go to market, your messaging. Everything relies on those 2 together. The third component is your value, which is why someone would buy from you as opposed to anyone else. And so there's always exchange of value. And so that's very important to take into account, because sometimes you're exchanging attention for something valuable, like here in this podcast. Hopefully someone's getting value from this, and we're really exchanging the time we have here today for what they're going to learn. Then as you go further down, typically there's a higher level of value for a higher value of benefits. So for instance, I could give away that guide I talked about, or a template to the results loop. That would be higher level value in exchange for kind of more attention. And then the last level of value is typically exchange of money for a result. So your product or service is really exchanged for the value that they get from it, or the end result. And so that's where the money and the exchange, and that's really what most people focus on. But that usually is the lowest hanging fruit isn't necessarily there, because it's great you can get people that are ready to buy today, but then you have no pipeline for the future. So you always want to be looking at, how am I getting people into my sales and marketing pipeline, and how can I kind of drive them through it faster? Those are the first three.
Those are the first three. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's intriguing to me that, and maybe that's not the best example, but I am intrigued with your cake business that you had that didn't work. So when you looked at markets for that, it's almost like anybody could use the birthday cakes. Or did you actually, when you look back on it, have some specific markets that you went after? Because then you had a unique offering, which then gave a very high value because of the personalization.
Correct.
What about the market piece? Did you actually have specific markets you went after? Or?
Well, back then this wasn't created yet. So if I was to do it today, I would definitely do it later. But yes, we did to some extent. We had markets. We had a corporate market, which was mostly for corporate gifts and trade shows and things like that nature. And then the other market was consumers. So this is where you mail a cake to your kid that's in college, and it has a picture of Fluffy, your dog, on it. That kind of thing. And so we had those two markets. But if I was to do this now, I'd really delve deeper into sub-markets, because, that's really where the bigger opportunities are. So, a lot of times that comes from segmenting your audience. But for instance, in trade shows, we had a couple successful pharma companies. And obviously pharma is a great industry, especially nowadays. So I would have probably done more with pharma. So it's really about prioritizing. Because where you are today is a result of the decisions you made in the past and really what you prioritize. So a system like this helps you prioritize where you want to go. So yes, you could serve every market, but what are the top 2 or 3 absolute best markets? That's really want to focus, because that's where your quickest growth is going to come from.
That's great. So you said that you would have some current examples of the system. So you want to touch on any of those now?
Yeah, I mean, kind of on the baking lines, one of the fun things I did is my daughter is a Girl Scout. And so I walked the Girl Scout troop, because oddly enough, they had to get badges. And one of the things they got badged for was for planning, for doing a business plan, if you can believe that. These are, 10, 11-year-old girls. Yeah. 11-year-old girls are teaching them how to do planning and business. And so they wanted to volunteer. I said, hey, I'll do it, because this is a very easy thing. And so I taught the Girl Scouts how to sell more cookies, and they dramatically increased it. Unfortunately, it came right before COVID. So, but just in that week or two, they were doing much better than they had previously. I walked them through the system. So I said to them, okay, who's your market? And so they said, well, mom and dad, that's an easy one, right? Well, who else? Neighbors, right? So the neighbors. And then I walked them really through different kinds of markets. So yes, but what about work? Does dad bring the cookies to work? Can you bring it to gym memberships? And just by going through that process, they thought of places that they could go that maybe they went 2 or 3 years ago and they forgot about it. And so just by going through the process, it made them remember where they had success, but also gave them a mechanism to brainstorm other opportunities for growth. Because one of the other Girl Scouts would say, hey, I went to, the mall. And then someone else would say, yes, that's a great idea. Let's stand outside, stop and shop, or the grocery store when they go through, and sell some cookies there. And so that experience drives kind of innovation. And so that was the first step. The second step, was your products and services. So I asked them, and you always go historically with your data. So I said, what are your most popular cookies? Historically, we're the most popular. And those are the Samoans and the Thin Mints, right? I think Thin Mints are actually number 1. And I said, okay, when you're standing outside of the grocery store, and they got permission, of course, I said, what's the first cookie you want to offer? And they got it pretty quick. Thin Mints. Why? Because people are more likely to say yes. I said, well, what do you do after that? Once they say yes, offer them the next popular, the Samoans. And then maybe 3, offer the one that's not selling so much, because you get, and what is that? That's a bundle. A bundle is a great way to productize what you have and increase your average order value, which really drives success. Value is really, why would someone buy? So why would they buy from you? Well, there's a personal connection. There's a certain amount of social pressure, right? Because, I don't want to be the uncle that didn't support my niece, the other 2 did, that kind of thing. Neighborhoods, there's a lot of social pressure there. So really having to understand, and of course they say, well, we're cute. That's another reason. So, kind of going through the process, and they literally said that. And what was really interesting, on a side note, as the girls were doing this, I asked them, what percentage of you would want to be an entrepreneur when you grew up? And I would say probably 60% raised their hand. And as they were going through this process, they were also filling out a results loop for their own business. There was a bakery there, there's a veterinarian, all these kinds of sub niches. So it's really exciting, because these young girls are kind of already, kind of casting their vision for the future. So that's kind of how that part works. Now from there, we kind of go into part 4 of a results loop, which is how you get new buyers. And so that's always a good place to start when you're starting your business. Although the lowest hanging fruit when you're established is really at the end of the loop, which is starting with loyalty. And so with the girls, I started with, okay, how do you get new buyers? Well, that really comes down to new places to visit. So, if mom's in a yoga studio, can you ask them? So really making a list of all the new opportunities. From a business perspective, this would say, okay, what can we offer of value that would build in a new funnel? So is there a new document we can provide called lead magnet? Is there a new white paper? Those kinds of things are what's going to drive the attention and the traffic and get them into your lead process. And that kind of goes into the value exchange we talked about before.
So Tony, I think that's great, because then you're really working with these new entrepreneurs, these young, what would happen in our schools if everybody learned this type of thing? It'd be phenomenal. But I'm curious, as you talked with them, did any ideas come up, or did they test any new markets, quote unquote, that didn't work out or turned out to be a bad idea?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I didn't get the end of that data, because literally the week I taught them the training, they went through it. They started selling more. They did a lot of things I talk about. And the biggest thing they did was really the upsells and the cross sells, which we'll get into after the loyalty. But then literally that week is when, this was late March or so. And that's when COVID hit, and they weren't allowed to go out and sell, unfortunately. And so as soon as things clear up again, I'm going to do another training and really kind of follow them up further.
Yeah, it'd be fascinating. It's a nice little case study, because normally we're hearing about a business, but a lot of us have kids. You have a lot of kids, don't you?
6. I have 6, actually.
Yeah. Okay. So, it's kind of fun to hear it from a kid perspective, type of thing. So that's great. Okay. Well, please continue. This is good.
Sure. So the next factor is really the size of the buyers. And this is something I hit on with the Girl Scouts for sure, because this is usually the lowest hanging fruit, as I mentioned, is really with size and loyalty. But with the size is, how do you increase the lifetime value of them? And one of the easiest ways to do is increase the average order value, so the one time that they're buying. So this means, upselling them. So when they do buy the Thin Mints, offer the Samoans. When they buy the Samoans, offer the next one down the list. And so that's important, but also doing it over time, because you don't want to exhaust your buyers, and just, if ideally they're buying more than once. And so you really want to take into account, how do I maximize the value, the revenue they're bringing in, the profitability they're bringing in over the course of working with you, and project it out 2-3 years. And that's really important, because there's a very important ratio. Your cost per acquisition, how much it costs to get a new customer, client, buyer, etc., relative to your lifetime value is really a number you want to know, because if that ratio is off, you're really going to spiral and potentially go out of business, and especially in cases like we have today.
Yeah, I don't know. This is kind of odd, but I'm starting to get in the mode of helping the Girl Scouts. So it's like, do they ask? When they're trying to do those add-on sales, it's kind of like, would you like fries with that? But it's not the same. So they're asking about another box. Did they ever ask something like, well, Do you have any events coming up where you need to bring a gift, or something like that?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the kind of thing we were talking about. Yeah, because once we went through this process, I actually gave them scripts on what to say and how to say it. So yeah, definitely you want to do that. And really getting more sophisticated, you can bundle things. So say, in other words, say, here's the 3 we normally sell together. Would you like to buy these 3? Giving them a package. And that's something the Girl Scouts could do corporately, is come up with names for the bundles. This is the family bundle. This bundling is always one of the lowest hanging fruits to sell more and increase your average order value, because it makes the decision a no-brainer. And that's exactly what McDonald's did. You referred to that. That's the supersized meals, right? So you get the meal, that's one step, but now it's a supersize. You get the, small, medium, humongous, cancer, or a heart attack special, that's what they're giving you. And so the more and more they're bundling it together, and that's what drives up the average order value each time.
Well, it's another thing that occurs to me as a potential strategy, and I'm going to move away from the Girl Scouts, although it applies there, is let's say I'm selling some type of technical product, and I've got a sales professional who's making that presentation and has gotten buy-in on something, but the sales professional also has an engineer with them. The engineer actually can be another voice to try to increase order size or create a bundle by saying, oh, and by the way, have you considered this, because it would add, this type of value. And being a second voice, it has more credibility than the salesperson trying to lump on more and more and more by him or herself, don't you think? Or am I going down the wrong path?
No, absolutely. I did that a lot. So when I was in the corporate world, one of the things I was brought in, it wasn't my main job. I was brought in as a technical salesperson all the time. So I'd go in because we would sell digital marketing products. The salesperson wouldn't really have the depth of knowledge, so they'd bring me along. But then, yeah, I would be that secondary voice that could help kind of ascend them into a higher average order, or really just build more trust and confidence in the process.
Yeah, and if it's done properly, sincerely, ethically, the engineer pretty easily slides into a trusted advisor role.
Correct.
Particularly if they're competent, and so it's a nice pairing, and it works as a win-win. Neither of us are saying that you want to try to push something on somebody they don't need.
Right. Always lead with value. So when I would go there, I would always try to teach them something, give them value, and that's really what drove the sale. And that's why, on another note, that's why on the results loop, the value is right in the center, because the value is the bridge between what you want to accomplish in terms of your goals with your markets and your offerings. It's the bridge to doing that through the number, size, and loyalty of your sales process.
Cool. Okay. So now we went through number. We've talked about size, right?
Yes. Now we're on to number 6, which is loyalty.
The big one.
Yeah, loyalty is really the lowest hanging fruit for an established company in particular. Loyalty is really the fundamental thing, and that's really what predicts how successful your company is going to be in the end, because loyalty is critical. And really the 2 factors I measure primarily there are your referrals and your recurring, or your revenue, repeat revenue, which is the best kind of revenue, is recurring revenue. So how often do people buy, and are they your advocate essentially? Are they, or back there used to be a book about raving fans. Are they a raving fan of yours? And
Yeah.
will they come back and really kind of spread the word about you?
Interesting. So how does that happen?
Yeah. So which one, the revenue, the recurring revenue, or
the raving fans? I mean, where I've got testimonials, I've got referrals. I mean,
yeah.
it seems like it comes down to how you maintain the relationship. Because when you're talking about loyalty, so many companies fall down just taking their existing clients for granted.
Yeah, absolutely. The relationship part is key. And I actually have a model for that. I tried to show it to you before. I got to dig it up, but essentially it's a pyramid. It's the retention pyramid, and really at the foundation of it, even more than relationships at times, is the product itself. Do you have a good product or service? So really kind of circling back into the beginning of the results loop is, do what you say you're going to do. Do you keep your promises? Is your product, good, basic things like that. I mean, because you can't even get to the relationship stage until you get that done. But kind of as you go up, you build more and more trust and authority, and you do that by building relationships, by building community. Community is another big one, because if you have that community, that's going to drive retention, because other people are going to be advocating for you in that community. It builds in switching costs, because if they have people that they trust within that group, they're less likely to leave. There's so many reasons to focus on loyalty, because it drives the success of everything else at the end of the day.
Yeah. Do you find that it's helpful for like one person in the organization to really own the loyalty piece?
I think loyalty should be at all levels of the organization. If people are in customer service, they should be focusing on loyalty. If they're on the sales process, because you think about it, might have a lot of loyalty to the person I talk to on the phone in customer service, but if my salesperson's rude, doesn't pick up my phone, I'm still gonna have a bad taste in my mouth. But even if that goes well, have a great relationship with the customer service and the salesperson, but the product stinks, I'm still not going to be loyal. So it's really connecting all the dots and really having it as more of a culture within the company and within the organization of loyalty.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. So, but what's an example you can give us of a company that didn't have this results loop, and how they were doing, and then they implemented, and what effect it had on the organization?
Yeah, well, a customer or a client we're talking with right now is actually expanding to a whole second company, because he's taking what he learned. He's probably the most fanatical fan we have of this for sure, but his name's Caleb. And what he discovered, he has a at-home care company, and he noticed that his most profitable segment was between 80 and 90. And so he put all of his effort into that segment, which, sounds small, but because he's so focused, he's got a much higher conversion rate. He gets a lot, more profit, more importantly. And so that really accelerated his growth to the point that he's now opening a second company to support another sub niche.
Well, that makes sense. I mean, when people get to be 80, 90 years old, their need for home care just accelerates. They need it much more, and they need quality. And people that are super reliability, people have super, systems in place, that type of thing. So that makes perfect sense. So that sounds like a small business that really applied it and got more focused.
Absolutely. I like I shared before, I recently applied this to my own business, because on the agency side, there was a lot of declines in travel and events and things like that. So we pivoted that agency called Big Fish to focus really on podcasting of all things, which is kind of funny because I'm on a podcast right now, but we're focused on building tools and to help podcasters. So I actually built a version of my results loop for planning a podcast, because it's a planning system. So it overarches into everything. So for instance, if you're launching a podcast, who's going to be your audience, which is another word for market? Products and services, what are you going to have for your offers on the podcast, things like that. So you can literally take all this and apply to that. And then we have software on the back end that helps people actually plan it using a SaaS model. And so we totally, which has recurring revenue, which is loyalty. So everything I do, whenever I think about business, I automatically, probably because I'm so obsessed with this, but everyone I talk to from a business perspective, I always put them through this framework.
So I'm curious, you are a serial entrepreneur, had a high degree of success. And how do you keep yourself focused?
Yeah, that can be a challenge because I'm always into creating. I like to create, but I know if you don't execute, then that's not going to go anywhere either. And so what I try to do is kind of limit what I'm doing. And I do that by having sounding boards is one way. So I always invest a lot into mentors and coaches and things like that I can run ideas against. So I literally have 2 or 3 meetings set up tomorrow to discuss with people that have mentored me over the years to discuss this podcasting that's working, which is already doing really well because we had a record number of sales in a week already on that. But I still want to get their advice. So one of the best things I do is have people that will hold me accountable. My wife first and foremost is at the top of the list because she always keeps me on track. But then, I do have quite a few mentors and role models.
Yeah, wise decision to have the wife involved and have a healthy discussion there. Keep her informed. Great job. So
yeah, thank you.
And the other mentor. So that's great. So as we kind of close this out, we are in this very economically challenging time. Looks like 2021 is going to have some challenges also. Yeah. What advice do you have for our leaders that are listening in?
Yeah, well, kind of thing that started me on this process in the first place was a lesson I learned a long time ago. So one thing I didn't share with you was I used to be a professional violinist. And so what I learned back when I was in the conservatory was, because when I was younger, I just wanted to blow through everything, learn the music, and not really take the time to study and get each note down. I kind of flub over the hard stuff, get right to the melody, have a great time, and then get yelled at by my teacher. And he always told me, he said, look, to have success, you have to slow down to speed up. And that's something I really advise everyone to do, which is why I created the system, because it enables you to slow down enough where you can actually do it. So I'm not asking anyone to take off a day and do this. Spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes, go through this kind of process, whether it's my process or someone else's, but think about what you're going to do. And particularly in these times, if you're struggling, you might want to consider, how do you pivot? That word seems so overused, but it's never been more true. Or another word you could use is adapt. But how do you adapt your business to the current environment, and more importantly, where it's going? So not just where we are today, but where is it going? Because a lot of these changes are going to be not temporary. They're going to be here for a long, long time, probably permanently. So for instance, a shift to more virtual, that's one of the reasons I moved into, podcasting and virtual events and things of that nature. So kind of figure out, where are you today? Are you aligned with where things are and where they're going? Because you want to position yourself for success. And it's always easier to ride the wave that's going as opposed to create your own. So go with the trends, go with where success is happening, and position yourself to capitalize on that, as opposed to bucking it and trying to do it your way and really struggling.
Cool. Fantastic. Well, where do people learn more about you? Oh, wait a minute. I got one more question.
Sure.
So once I create this organization results loop for myself, my team, how often do I go back to it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I like to go to it quarterly. I think quarterly is a great cadence for planning, but it doesn't hurt to look at it once a month just to see if your numbers are on the right track. So for instance, because part of it, I don't know if you can see it on the board though, is like your goals. So if you have a goal to double in size in a year, and you're in the first quarter and you've grown by 2%, that might be a red flag that you have to kind of adjust. So you want to kind of look at where you are relative to your goals at the very least.
Yeah, maybe I'm too type A, but I think once I create it, I would look at it. I would encourage my leaders to be looking at once a week on their own, or we do it as a group. But I would do it weekly, just for that reason that you brought up. If it falls behind, I want to know within a week. I don't even want to wait a month.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't.
Toast.
Yeah, honestly, I don't either. But I always try to balance it with what people can actually accomplish. Because today, most people sadly are not doing anything. So if I said to look at it weekly, they probably wouldn't. But me, I'm the kind of person that has dashboards and looks at things constantly. Not like it's almost like a stock. You don't want to look at so much that you're changing your trades every day, but you do want to kind of look at it enough so you have a sense of what's going on. So that's kind of a good analogy on how to use a tool like this.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. So Tony, how can they learn more about you? Get a hold of you, whatever.
Absolutely. Probably one of the best ways is go to my website. It's meettonyg.com. And from there, you can just scroll down, go to LinkedIn and connect with me on LinkedIn. I love to engage with people personally. And so if there's a question that anyone has that we didn't hit on today, be happy to set up some time and discuss it with you, or just answer it through the LinkedIn chat's fine too.
Okay, so meettonyg.com, LinkedIn, any other websites that people should be aware of? I mean, we're going to post some with the podcast, but anything else?
Yeah, probably one of the best things I have to offer people is this. I have this template here, which we've been going over today. I have this available on my website for free. And when I say free, like literally free, like I'm not asking for a lead form to be filled out or anything. So you can get this and some of the stories I've talked about at smallstepsmanifesto.com.
Smallstepsmanifesto.com.
Correct.
Okay, cool. Sounds great. Well, Tony, thank you very much. This has been great to have you on. I encourage people to check it out. Sounds like it sounds like a great discussion tool. So hope they go into it. I'm going to go into it.
Oh, great. Yeah, no, sounds good. It's available as a whiteboard even. So that's how I do it. I whiteboard. I'm always whiteboarding with my team. And so that's the way I think, but it's also, you can print it out. There's a million ways to do it, but you're right. Discussion is really, a key thing that you want to take into account with your team.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Tony.
You're welcome. Thanks so much.